All right. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John, and it is time for another Motorweek retro review reaction. This week it is the 1989 Suzuki Swift GTI. Now, I did an Isuzu earlier, and this kind of popped up, and I was like, oh man, a GTI Swift. Gotta do it. So, as always, grab your beverage of choice. Surprise, today we've got Sprite. Get comfy in your chair. And let's take a little trip down memory lane to a car that I expect to be fully underwhelming.
Motorweek 89, television's automotive magazine, with your host, John Davis.
Well, hello and welcome again to Motorweek 89. We're glad to have you with us. What you're about to see is a first. As first in life go, it's not a very big one, but it is worth mentioning. We're going to test a car called a Swift GTI. It's the first car we've ever tested that bears the Suzuki name. It joins the Suzuki Samurai and Sidekick sport utility vehicles. But here's what makes the Suzuki story really interesting. The three-door Swift is one of the smallest cars you can buy. And Suzuki is trying to sell it at a time when most buyers aren't interested in small cars. But the Japanese company has a way to get around that problem.
Okay, so first off, let's joke. That thing looks a lot like a Geo Metro. The second thing is, if you'd asked me when Suzuki came to America, I would have said the early 80s, right? Maybe the mid. But 89, that was the first time we actually got products from them with their own name. That's a little surprising. I mean, that's kind of what happened with Mitsubishi is they were bringing products here as Chryslers. And then later we're like, hey, we should sell it under our own name. I had no recollection that Suzuki was not selling as Suzukis for that long. That's really surprising.
It's called getting back to basics. A cliche, of course, but it's a proven formula for success when the odds are against you. You can have the Swift GTI in any color you want, as long as it's black, white, or red. The base price is $89.95, $99.95 if you want an automatic transmission. The only option is air conditioning, which will cost you $620, and your local Suzuki dealer will even put it in for you. Sounds like simpler times, doesn't it? But let's not forget, this is a performance car. This little 1.3-liter four-cylinder produces an amazing 100 horsepower at 6,500 RPM. It does it with twin cams, 16 valves, and multi-point fuel injection. However, inside, there's little to tell you.
Okay, they are flying through this. Let me back up here real quick. Let's talk about the styling. It's fine. I mean, if you've ever seen a Geo Metro, I prefer the Geo slightly. This is a little more in the certainly like the windows and the body frame and things like that. It looks like a Geo, right? It looks like the Metro. At the front, these headlights are just a little more squared off. This isn't quite as lovable as the Metro. For that reason, I would go with the Metro slightly. I think it's just a little more cuddly, for lack of a better way to put it. Engine. Okay, it's got 100 horsepower, and this is their sporty car. The engines in these, Metro primarily, were always underwhelming. We always, nobody denies that. But 100 horsepower in a car this light, man, that's not bad. I mean, it's not overwhelming. You're not like, I'm finally going to beat the Golf GTI, but it's not bad. Let's hear what they say about the interior. I don't know what they're going to do with 7 minutes when they're almost done with the interior.
GTI is anything more than an econo-box. The dash is a collection of modules bolted together, and these all seem to rub together and produce lots of squeaks. Gauges are Spartan, but we like the tone-coded faces. Gray for the bigger ones, black for the smaller. This treatment helps your eye to find what you need. The cloth-covered seats are simple, providing good back and side support, but limited support for upper legs. Adjustments are sparse but efficient, and seatbelts are manual. Controls are well laid out, and we were amazed by how many things there are to control, including dual power mirrors and a rear window defogger, things you don't even find as standard on much more expensive cars. But we'd trade the power mirrors for a more efficient heater control. Despite the gradations on the control face, the heater seemed to have only two settings, very hot and very cold. But the standard 4-speaker stereo helped us warm up to the car, and it drowned out the 71 decibels of interior noise the car generates at 55. We also appreciated the standard remote releases for the trunk and gas door. Other amenities include a console cup holder and additional console storage room. Interior plastics are not the finest, but they're a grade above what you'd find in bargain cars from Korea. As for the back seat,
let's talk about all that for a minute, because that's really fascinating. This is a cheap car built down to a price. And I would argue, again, on these videos, I never go look these up beforehand. I want you to have raw thoughts from me. And sometimes they're wrong. I admit that. This feels very much like a car that was released years ago and finally made its way to America. Those individual modules they were talking about on the dash, I kind of felt like the Japanese were moving away from that by the late 80s. So this feels like just an older design. And the fact that they say they rub together, that's something that the Japanese got really, really good at. Moving away from casting dashes in all one piece, when like a lot of American cars, not all of them of course, but a lot of American cars, they were still using multiple different pieces that ended up making noise and annoying buyers. And then they used cheap plastic. That could be expected. You've got a car that's under $10,000. But a grade above the Koreans. What a nice little dig, I think that is. But lots of little touches in here. I mean, this is if I go back and think about some of the cheapest, flimsiest, least desirable cars of my teenage years, basically the Metro would come up. Maybe the Subaru Justy as well. But this, to have remote releases by the seat, to have power mirrors, nice little touches. But then they go back to the dashboard, and not only the way it's cut up, but there's a little shelf right there on top, but it's not really used for anything, and it's not really stylish. And then things set down underneath it, and they're set back from each other, so they get even harder to see. A much older ergonomic approach to interiors. This is a mixed car that sounds like the materials are higher quality than what the Koreans were bringing, but still just older. Mixed, but somewhat positive. Honestly, I came away from all that being like, for the price, I'm okay with all this.
Can fit 2 adults here, but they'd better not be taller than 5 feet 8 inches. There is limited head and leg room. Fortunately, the rear seat splits and folds 50-50, so unused passenger room can be converted to storage room. Unfortunately, the seats don't go all the way flat. We're not sure whether people will be more concerned with practical or sporting uses of the GTI. After all, EPA fuel economy ratings of 29 city, 36 highway are very good considering all this car's power. Our test number was equally fun at 35 miles per gallon. As for fun numbers, our Swift went from 0 to 60 in 9 seconds. The quarter mile took 16.7 seconds and ended at 83 miles per hour. While a little shy of what we hoped for, the engine gets extra style points for its willing feel. As with many hot...
Well, hold on, let's pause it there for a second, because I want to laugh. They're like, well, this gas mileage is pretty good for all the power it gives. It's 100 horsepower. I mean, but hold on. Those acceleration numbers were not bad. They may say, oh, we expected a little bit better, but that's not bad at all. I'm not saying it makes this a desirable car, but it at least made me go, huh, how about that?
Front drive cars, torque steer is ever present, but it's not overwhelming. Shifter feel is fairly light. The action is smooth and the lever goes where it's told. Our biggest complaint is with the clutch. Effort is low to the point of lifelessness, and our car's clutch didn't want to grab when released. But the brakes grabbed nicely, with stopping distances averaging to 125 feet. It was very easy to hold the brakes at the threshold of a skid and thereby apply maximum braking power. We did experience some locking from the right rear wheel, but it was not enough to upset the car. To go with the four-wheel...
Okay, I don't mean to stop it again, but that's not bad. Not bad. You know, if you're new here and you haven't watched this before, I've kind of got 115 feet. That's the marker between really good and not. And 125 is still not terribly bad, because my opinion when I drove Metros was the brakes were sponges rubbing together on pieces of wood. That's surprisingly good. And I really want to focus on how perfectly straight that stop was. That was really, really impressive. I'll give up a few feet for all that control. Absolutely amazing.
Disc brakes, the Swift also gets four-wheel independent suspension, struts at all four corners. Highway ride has typical short wheelbase choppiness, but control on rough surfaces is good. On our smooth test track, the Swift GTI showed more excellent behavior. Its size makes it very maneuverable, and its non-assisted steering gives the driver a one-to-one feel with the road that so many cars these days are missing. Stability is good with mild front-end plow. The rear end can't be coaxed around at all, but that's a trait only the most demanding drivers will miss. The Swift might even handle better on more aggressive performance tires, but we were glad to have the standard mud and snow tires for an early spring snowstorm. In our safety check, the Swift passes with shoulder belts for rear seat passengers, but it fails to have front passive restraints or anti-lock brakes. For comparison, the Honda Civic Si cost about $1,000 more than the Suzuki Swift GTI, and it lacks the Swift's long list of standard equipment. The Honda has about the same acceleration as the Swift and takes a bit more fuel to do it, but the Honda has a more refined feel and more interior room. A comparably equipped Ford Escort GT would also cost about $1,000 more than the Suzuki. The Escort isn't as quick or nimble as the Swift, but it is more refined and also has more interior room. The Swift GTI list of hits includes its willing engine with good power, handling, and brakes. We also like its low price and high level of standard equipment. We don't like its either-or heat control and weak clutch action. Also, interior noise is high and there are too many dash squeaks. But if Suzuki follows the lead of other Japanese car firms, these weak points will be quickly corrected. And we applaud Suzuki for producing a car with so much bang for so little money. We doubt anything except another oil shortage will turn mainstream American taste to transportation this small or basic. But if the time comes, Suzuki will definitely be ready.
What an interesting one. That really comes across to me as a car that didn't really know what it wanted to be. First off, comparing it to the Honda Civic, no, the Civic was twice the car of this. But let's assume for a minute this car is reliable. Who buys it? It's the sporty version, but it's not better than anything else out there. A cheaper interior, but better equipment. It's tiny inside, and there's a lot of joy of driving tiny cars. I've driven tiny little Japanese hatchbacks on the interstate or down 2-lane roads at 2 o'clock in the morning, and those are fun. You know, do that with a Dodge Colt. That was fun. This, it never gave off that fun vibe. Suzuki just, their cars never oozed quality. Now, I actually think they build good cars for the third world, for emerging markets. What am I trying to say here? That I actually think that they've got some engineering prowess behind them. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. That they build some stuff that's actually pretty rugged. It's just a cut below everything else. Comparing it, for example, take the Swift against a Civic. Boom, they're two different size classes as far as I'm concerned. I don't think that's a fair comparison. So I find myself wondering, who's the market for that car specifically, the GTI version? If you really want something sporty, I think there's better out there. If you want passenger space and refinement, there's more expensive, but better out there. I think that this engine is a little misplaced because those other cars that cost more, they had nicer interiors or nicer rides or just more refinement overall. So this comes across like trying to be the cheapest car out there. And I don't think that happens with this engine. Now, all of a sudden, you have a slightly less efficient engine in there, a slightly less powerful engine. It gets slightly better gas mileage. It's a little bit cheaper. All of a sudden, for me, a lot of these complaints that they have fade away, right? I don't care about the cheap dash as much. I don't care about a lot of things when the price is a screaming deal. And because it had a Japanese company, I would have a little bit more faith than picking up, say, an Excel from Hyundai. Interesting car. Now, honestly, I've driven multiple Metros in my life. I've driven convertibles and everything else. And the problem is I love the idea of these small two-door hatchbacks, cheap, tiny engines, revving them around, bombing around in the city. I love the idea of them. And this is one of the few cars that I've ever driven where afterwards I got out and was like, no. I remember one time I drove a Metro, and when I got back and the salesman was like, what'd you think? And I was like, I think I need more car. That decibel reading, that 71 decibels tells you what you need to know, that for everything else, the positives and negatives and the gas mileage and the stopping and everything else, even if you look at the space and how it sits, ultimately, it was a noisy, cheap hatchback. And there were just better options out there. Even if it meant buying used, there were better options out there. Let me know what you think below, guys. I appreciate you being here. Thanks.